And business at the top of the hour here on France 24. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're wondering what could be the plan B for Syria at this point. With us to talk about it is Haitham Mana, longtime Syrian dissident, who was telling us before we went on air how several of his family members, including his brother, have been killed since the start of the uprising. Thanks for being with us. We also want to thank Joshua Landis from the University of Oklahoma, whose Syria Comments blog is widely read. Thank you for being back with us. Thank you as well to Ole Sullivan of Human Rights Watch, Paul Valley of Sciences Po, the French Political Science Institute, and Walid Fares, who is acting as an advisor on the Mitt Romney campaign in the United States. Thank you for joining us from Washington. Before the break, we were talking about the standoff, describing how on one side, each side thinks it can win. Each side has its backers, the West on one side, Russia on the other. Now, we've just seen a G20 summit that had its first face-to-face sit-down between Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin in 3 years. First time they'd been together in the same room in 3 years, with some even saying that Putin has now come around.
President Putin has been explicit he is not locked into Assad remaining in charge in Syria. What we need next is an agreement on a transitional leadership which can move Syria towards a democratic future, which protects the rights of all its communities. At the same time, it makes no sense for any country to be supplying arms to a regime that is killing its own people with mortars, snipers, and attack helicopters.
Turns out that could be wishful thinking on the part of the British Prime Minister, the Russian president quick to rectify.
We believe that no one has the right to decide for another nation who should be in power and who should step aside. We know that part of the Syrian people, who are represented by an armed faction, want President Bashar al-Assad to step down. But this is not all the people.
Now, of course, it wasn't David Cameron that was in the room with Vladimir Putin. It was Barack Obama, the U.S. president, who, by the way, had also a separate one-on-one at the G20 with his Chinese counterpart. Here's what the U.S. president had to say.
I do not think they condone the massacres that we've witnessed. And I think they believe that everybody would be better served if Syria had a mechanism for ceasing the violence and creating a legitimate government.
Interesting comment there, Joshua Landis. He's sort of hinting Barack Obama there when he says, they believe that everybody would be better served if Syria had a mechanism for ceasing the violence and creating a legitimate government. He's hinting that somehow Vladimir Putin and Hu Jintao don't think there's a legitimate government right now in Damascus?
Well, I think he's pointing towards the UN mission, which was to move towards a transition. The trouble is that the Russians have said in no uncertain terms that they want a peaceful transition and they want to see an opposition that's willing to negotiate with Assad, sit down and talk to him. There isn't such a thing today. And so really this is a way for the Russians to pull, say that they're willing to give up Assad, but at the same time pull the rug out from underneath the American position. I would like to bring up something that Walid Fares, I thought, an interesting comment he made, which is that you need foreign intervention for this government to lose. But at the same time, he pointed out that the opposition is getting stronger and stronger. Now, I think most people in Washington, and this comes to your plan B, most people in Washington, policymakers, believe that the opposition is going to win in the long run, that the momentum is on their side. 65% of Syrians are Sunni Arabs. As this war becomes more and more sectarian, they're going to defect. And the opposition is going to get stronger with the help of both the Gulf Arab money, the arms, and intelligence and support from the international community and the sanctions. That Russia cannot win this one, neither can Assad and Iran. But the trouble with this is, of course, that it's going to be long and bloody. And that's the plan B. And I think that plan B is the West is truly committed to bringing down Assad one way or the other. If the Russians want to prolong the regime and keep on supporting him, they're willing to take on Russia on this issue and pump in arms, pump in money. Of course, it's not the best plan for them because When they did this the last time in Afghanistan in the 1980s, they ended up with al-Qaeda and extremists all over the place and a bloody mess. And they're very anxious about that. In fact, the CIA is in Syria today, I think, trying to talk to the different, or at least in the margins of Syria, trying to start conversations with most of these militias to find out which ones are friendly to the United States, so that they do not end up giving money to Salafists and letting the Saudis call the shots on who gets armed.
They're there to try to speak to all sides, Joshua Landis, but according to French magazine Intelligence Online, the CIA is also training Free Syrian Army fighters in Jordan, many of them former army officers.
Well, it makes sense. It's smart. If you want them to win, that's what you have to do. You've got to get them better arms. You got to get them lots of intelligence, give them satellite photos, let them know where the Syrian army is. When the Syrian army comes to get them, you've got to let them know so they can run away. And you've got to help them develop a game plan. There are hundreds of militias. They're not talking with each other. They're not coming up with a game plan. They're just striking out blindly. And this is a monstrous undertaking to develop command and control for the Syrian opposition, get them better arms, and get the international community as much on their side as you can. And that's what America is trying to do today. That's the plan B.
Walid Fares, have you spoken to any flies on the wall from that meeting in Los Cabos in Mexico between Vladimir Putin and Barack Obama? Is there something we should know? Are they working on something? We know that, for instance, on June 10th, the State Department's man on this issue, Frederick Hoff, sat down with the Free Syrian Army just after he'd gone to Moscow. So is there something brewing?
Actually, my logic would be the other way around. As long as neither from Russia nor from Washington, from this administration, we have signs and signals that they have now something in common, those meetings are meetings, in the sense that we would know in the international community if Washington and Moscow would agree really on a political change in Syria. You would see immediately a reaction in the Security Council, you would see reactions within the Syrian armed forces. It would be easier. What I think is happening is that the Russians are trying to market the position to the United States and the West that they are willing to abandon Assad. That's the first sentence. But the price is going to be so long and so deep that it's impossible. If they do not let go of the Syrian armed forces control on the ground, if they won't accept, for example, additional sanctions and or intervention, and when I say intervention, I don't mean boots on the ground, a la Libya, meaning from the air and arming the opposition. Everything that can let Assad go, the Russians are saying, yeah, we don't want that. But we will discuss the future. With regard to the administration, if I may say here, it will be very difficult unless a cataclysmic change occurs between now and November 6th, that any U.S. president, not just President Obama, any U.S. president, could wage a campaign a la Libya, let alone a la Iraq, in Syria today. Because unlike in Libya, the Syrian regime has regional ramifications. What the Iranians have been trying to tell the United States for the last 6 to 7 months is that if you're going to attack Syria by any ways or means and arm the opposition, those who are going to be part of this attack, that will be Turkey, will get reactions, terrorist reactions inside Turkey that intimidated Erdogan to a point. So without a U.S.-led effort at the Security Council and post-Security Council to have an effect on the ground, I don't think either side have changed their positions.
Paul Valley, do you agree with Walid Fares that perhaps if there is a positive thing out of all this, is that there are signs that the horse trading, the bargaining between Moscow and Washington has indeed begun?
Well, the horse trading has been there for a few months now. Of course, the electoral context in Russia slowed down things as well. There's the fact that, of course, there's now an electoral context in the United States, which is also holding the whole process hostage in some ways as well. What we're hearing, of course, it works both ways. The Russians, too, can play hardball and say that they will find ways to support militarily the government if they don't want it to be seen overthrown as a result of an increased armament effort by the Western powers towards the different opposition groups. Just last week, the chairman of the Russian Arms Export Board was explaining in detail the vast array of anti-aerial systems that they had given to the Syrians to prevent any kind of air support towards the opposition. Just this week, there was, of course, the case of this Russian cargo ship that was transporting attack helicopters. Now, the British government apparently found the way to actually get that ship to turn back, and the British insurer for the cargo withdrew its coverage. Yeah. That's one sort of non-violent way to actually enforce these sanctions. But naturally, of course, military support for the government could come from other sources, and Iran is one regional power that does have an interest in continuing to support it. So, of course, we can say that the Security Council is the area where the horse trading is taking place, but at some times we're obviously seeing the limited results of that, as in Los Cabos, where the President of the United States, the British Prime Minister, the French President, all in some way try to go out of their way to say that they have finally gotten the Russian President to see through their views. And then he holds his own press conference and he says the exact contrary, and he'll be supported on that by his foreign minister and by other commentators in Russia. So there are other fora which need where the horse trading has to take place, including outside the Security Council, where the veto is a problem. So that's where we come back, I think, to a problem we've mentioned about other venues where the negotiations might take place. Clearly, this conference of the Friends of Syria is seen by several actors as not inclusive enough. The Russians have been touting this contact group, and they want to organize their own.
I was going to say, you stole my thunder there, Paul Valley. I was going to put that question to Haitham Mana. There was an idea bandied today, just as, by Stuart Patrick on his blog on the Council on Foreign Relations website, where he said, why not throw a bone to Moscow and let them host a big conference? And, we know we've got a divided international community and a divided Syrian opposition. Let Moscow host it. And that way, it's a good way for them to be the ones to sort of take charge, as it were. What do you think of that idea?
I think there were a very very important common points between Obama and Putin in the last meeting. Stopping violence. How to stop violence. And to stop violence, you must control both. Violence is not only from the state. The regime is really the most important force in the country, organized with a military and security strategy. The others are not organized, decentralized, and in a situation of anarchy. But both are necessary to stop violence.
But on this idea of letting Moscow host a conference, do you think that would be...
Moscow can stop violence, because if the regime is under the pressure of Moscow, he would stop. And when the regime stops, we can ask our friends and allies to stop. We cannot say to these people...
And do you see the Russians being able to get everybody around the table? And when I say everybody, I mean your organization as well as the Syrian National Council, as well as the West.
Yes. I think that I met Lavrov last month, and we discussed a lot of the solution, what can be the solution. And we were very happy, our delegation, that it wasn't the static image of the old Russian. It was a dynamic politic which we heard from them. For that, all these declaration and anti-declaration, correction sometime, I don't take care of it. Really now, there is a dynamic position of Russian. They try to find a good solution, which they are a part of it.
All right, so there are positive signs, and there is common ground. It's a bit cryptic, though, at times, as Paul Valley was mentioning, when you look at the closing statements from that G20 summit. And also, let's not forget, we've not heard from the Assad regime on this one. And just as late as Tuesday, their ambassador to the United Nations reminding everyone that to touch their country is to set off a booby trap. His remarks, something of a veiled threat, if you will.
When somebody with a heavyweight, when a heavyweight in this United Nations organization speaks about the civil war in Syria as if he is talking a joke. Does he know what does it mean, a civil war in Syria? That means the explosion of all the area, not only Syria. That will impact on everybody in the area. People should be reasonable, calculate their words, think before speaking, lightly, and act really with the sense of responsibility.
Ale Sylvain, your reaction to those remarks?
Well, I think I think he's right in pointing out the potential regional implications of continued violence in Syria, and that's why I think the international community needs to really be engaged to find a solution. I think it backfires on him. He's saying because of this you need to stay out, but I think that's one of the reasons why the international community needs to be engaged. But I think it is absolutely correct, as you were mentioning. I think we need to play the ball back into Russia's court at this point. Russia is the one who's been holding up stronger measures from the Security Council. And I'm not talking about military intervention. I'm talking about sanctions. I'm talking about arms embargo. I'm talking about a referral to the International Criminal Court for what a lot of organizations, including the UN, has deemed to be crimes against humanity. So we need to play it back to Russia and say, you need to now show that you have influence with the regime and make them stop the violence, make them stop these human rights violations.
Very briefly, because we're almost out of time, Joshua Landis, do you agree?
Well, I think that, both sides have a narrative. The Syrian side is, we haven't seen anything yet. You push with this, and there's going to be a monstrous civil war that's going to suck everybody in, so let us win. Many people are saying, look, Syria is in the middle of a civil war already. There is no way to solve this problem without a civil war, and it won't be that bad. This is just the inevitable transformation of a nation. America went through a civil war. France has gone through civil wars. This is going to happen. You've got to get behind it. You've got to make it happen quicker, faster, and then it'll be over. And that's, like pulling a Band-Aid off a scab. And that's the two sides' argument. They're both trying to scare each other or to not scare each other. And we don't really know what the outcome of a full-fledged civil war will be.
And we'll have to leave it there. Joshua Landis, I want to thank you for joining us. I also want to thank Walid Fares in Washington and for being with us here on the set, Haitham Mana, Paul Valley, and Ale Sylvain. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's time for business. Marcus Carlson has all the latest.